What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. Before we get started, this video is for subscribers only, so if you haven't hit the subscribe button already, you need to do that now so you don't miss this content or any future content, and trust me, you do not want to miss this conversation, so I'll give you a second to do that right now. Okay, so at the beginning of the offseason, I said that I wanted this to be one of the most transparent free agencies possible. I like to put out as much information as possible, and some of the stuff we couldn't really share throughout the process. I'm sure you can understand that with negotiations and stuff like that. However, now that everything is done, I wanted to bring Rachel on to run down exactly kind of how the negotiations went, the timelines of everything, some of the creative things that we had to do, some of the struggles that we had in just the fact that this is a different type of free agency deal. So we're gonna go through kind of from start to finish on the off season of like where we started and how this thing came to be. So I guess it all started like with me telling you what I wanted in free agency, and I was able to put some of that information out, but just to recap it really quickly, I wanted a partnership with the team, I wanted a chance to win, I wanted someone that fairly compensated me for the value that I produced on the field. I wanted to go to a place where I could be promoted, and the team was willing to let me do the things that I'm doing, somewhere where I felt valued as a person and a player, and somewhere where I had a chance to win. And obviously the money was...
but every time, when you gave us that list right now, you put money kind of in the middle, and every time you talked to us about what was really important to you, it never really was the money. Yeah. And there were so many other things. The money is important because it allows you to do all the things that you do off the field, and hopefully to advance the game of baseball in the long run. But the money itself and just getting the most lucrative deal wasn't your top priority at all. And I think
my top priorities were winning, partnership with the team, and being open to letting me pitch every fourth day, and letting me do the things that I do outside of the field.
And I think a team that that embraces analytics, that has that kind of stuff already put in place. Right. But we had to kind of make you understand that this contract negotiation specifically is going to be super important, not necessarily just for you, but for the future of players to come.
I think that's a really important topic that a lot of people miss, because I know we saw a lot on social media. They're like, oh, and we'll talk about the media in a second, but oh, you changed your mind, you just want the most dollars and you don't care about the fans or anything like that. But I think it's really important because most fans don't understand that how the system works. So
everyone in free agency is, and it works the same. It's very different, but similar in a sense in arbitration as well. But everyone, you kind of base what you're asking for on, recent contracts in the book that came before you. And that's how you value, that's how the market kind of works, right? They compare you to the rest of the market. When was the last time, I think, that a free agent going into their free agent season had just won a Cy Young?
It's been a while.
I saw
I think Maddox was the last one in the mid-90s.
Okay, yeah. So, and I don't think anyone's been as young as you are, coming off a Cy Young win and going into the free agent market. So if whatever contract you take, that is going to have a huge impact on if anybody else in the future comes off a Cy Young win and goes into the free agent market. Because if you take a contract that's, let's say this next year, you don't get, if you're just kind of, in the middle of the pack with all the other pitchers, a future Cy Young winner is gonna, if they're trying to argue for a lot more money, teams are just gonna point back to, well, Trevor Bauer, he won the Cy Young and he got paid this. You're not worth that.
Now, how far back does that go? So how many years could this affect out other players? Because you have a lot of experience with this in arbitration, because arbitration is a very complicated system. But how far back do they look? Is it 2 years, 4 years?
It's
10 years?
There's no specific number for free agency. But you're gonna look at, because the market actually moves, unlike arbitration. So free agency, you've got inflation, you've got it. There's no hard cutoff like that. But it's important.
It could be years though, right? Because you look at the way the market's moved. It's been, you had Greinke that signed with Arizona a while back, and then you had Strasburg and Cole sign more recently. And so
but there's been other players in between that too. So either way, it's not important as much as like going back and how long it's going to impact it, but it's important because, I mean, there hasn't been a Cy Young winner going into their free agent season, not in your kind of era of baseball. Yeah. So for you to set the market somewhat was important, and you had a responsibility as a player to do so and to, you know, establish a strong, you know, kind of base contract for a Cy Young winner. So that was kind of, I think, one of the main things that, you know, we had to make sure that you understood along with your other, you know, desires.
Okay, so I said earlier that we were going to talk a little bit about the media and kind of how that played out. So, I mean, starting really like the first couple days of free agency, the World Series had just ended, like November 3rd or 4th or something like that. John Heyman had come out and said he was hearing rumblings of the Giants being interested in me, and I think 5 years, 150 million or whatever the case. And that was like the very first report of free agency before we'd even talked to any teams, right? So what was the media's role? Because I know like...
So the media, I guess one of the interesting parts being on this side of it, because I've followed free agency for, you know, several seasons pretty closely in the past. But I've never really been on this side of it until now. And you realize a lot of the reports, they're based in no reality. Yeah. The media, now look, teams could talk to the media for a variety of reasons if they're trying to influence other moves in the market. You know, sometimes, and this happens probably more often than not, you have other agents that try to influence the market. Now, you didn't really have anyone that was comparable in your market this year to influence, but that doesn't mean that, like, there are a lot of moving parts. You know, where Springer's going to go affects right. You in a sense.
So what you're saying, just for clarity, is that, like, let's say there was two pitchers in the market in the same year with similar stats. Like, one agent might put something out kind of about the other, like might leak some information or something to a reporter to try to like pull the market down for the other player or push the market up for the other player.
Or not necessarily, yeah, or just try to shift them to a different team, you know, depending on where they want to go. So
that's part of the tactic that agents use to like try to negotiate the deal for their player to get to where their player wants to go for the money they want. So a lot of stuff will come from not even like the agency that I'm with, but it might come from another.
Right, the agents aren't, and look, the agents, they do it, but I would say for the most part, a lot of it is coming from teams as well, like the stuff that goes through the media. So,
and that's to try to kind of drive price down.
Yeah, and change things.
Yeah.
Shift things, change things, and shift them in their favor, whatever they want. I mean, you could go into a whole video on just how to use the media to your advantage. Yeah. I guess what we tried to do was we made it clear that, you know, we were going to put out information, that we could, and I guess we kind of urged people to follow my account for accurate information, because essentially everything else, it was coming from somebody who heard something from somebody who heard something, and it was like a game of telephone. Yeah. And so all the stuff that the media put out, it was never any firsthand knowledge of anything.
How many times during this process did you have a writer or I have a writer reach out and say, "Oh, I heard that this team, should I look into this? Or I'm hearing this, is this true?" Or like,
and it was laughable. Some of the times
were like, so funny.
Wow, like where are you even getting that from? And it's funny because people on social media seem to think that anything a writer puts out is like gospel and it's the truth because this is their job. But I think it's very important to at least make clear that they have angles too,
100%.
And they're working, right? If they help a team by giving this information, they're the ones
Of course, they're trying to play. They're trying to play the agencies to get information. They're trying to play the teams. They're trying to find insiders that actually do know inside information, because the teams aren't giving them all the information.
Right. So
it's a really crazy world.
Yeah, you realize like it's unfortunate because a lot of this stuff, and I think people, and I've talked to teams on this end too, they're like, yeah, when I have conversations with teams, a lot of times they're like, well, I heard this in the media, but we all know, like, I'm not even going to necessarily believe that because it's probably not true. Like, teams know it too. Everyone knows what the media says. I think the only people who don't seem to know it for sure are the fans on social media. They seem to believe if a writer puts it out, it's the truth.
Well,
and really, it's just someone angling to
that's what they've come to expect. The fans come to expect that they get the information from the writers, because players don't usually put it out, teams don't put it out, and the agents don't put it out. So the writers are the only ones that the fans come to rely on to get their information. And like, what did you say? Over half the information that was put out about this process was fake, right? Was just false. Completely not even close.
Yeah, just false.
Yeah, just false information.
So I think one of the main things in the beginning that was false was this idea that you won the Cy Young and suddenly you've changed your mind in terms of what you want, right? We heard all of these reports that, so much for these 1-year deals, which, I think our contract just shows you, we gave you 3 1-year deals.
Right.
But like the 1-year deal thing, which was rooted in this idea of flexibility that was so important to you.
Just control over my career and my happiness. And
that never changed.
No.
The media, the amount of times the media tried to say that now because you won the Cy Young, and look,
I was looking for a 6 or 7 year deal at one point, according to the media.
Yeah. So that part never changed, and we'd always laugh. And the teams that we were talking to, while in the beginning this is how they thought about your deal, because this is the traditional route to take, we always made it clear that this is what, we're open to hearing everything, but at the end of the day, like the flexibility, you never wavered in that.
I want to touch on that a little bit more in depth, but just while we're on the media thing, one last thing is one of the narratives was that I'm like, I don't have a market,
right? And
that I'm not signing because no one's interested.
So that's right. So that's kind of it's been the case, and now just looking back on all sorts of free agencies. It seems to always be that narrative. The media puts out that the player is asking for this, which apparently you are asking for, 250 plus mil in like 6 or 7 years. Yeah. So, while teams at first might have suggested things like that, I can assure you, like, you knew what you wanted. Yeah. More or less. So
that was one of those false media narratives that literally had no basis in reality.
Right. Well, no, there were some basis, I think, in it where how teams viewed it. That could be true. But there was but it was always phrased as Trevor Bauer is asking for this.
Yeah.
And so there was no basis in reality for that. So I think the way the media always makes it seem is that after winter meetings, which we didn't have this year because of COVID-19, if you're not signed, you start to hear media reports of, well, he's asking for too much, and so nobody's making offers. And I guess to explain the way that really this whole process works is this is like a marriage, right? It's a courtship. You don't have dinner with somebody and then, a week later talk about moving in together and, your future together.
Unless you're on a reality TV show.
Unless you're on a reality TV show, which we definitely were not.
So would have been a pretty good one if we were.
Yeah, that's true. Especially like the last week. However, so that's how they kind of tried to portray, and that's how they always portray free agencies in the media. But
let's talk a little bit about the timeline of the offseason, because I think it's a good segue into when stuff happens. So the World Series ends, right?
So then you have the 5 days, and so we've talked about before, I think, the actual dates and timelines. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of that, but you essentially have you'll have the GM meetings after the dead period. Once free agency opens, you'll have the GM meetings where a lot of times meetings will occur. Agents will go and meet with teams.
And that's late November, right?
Yeah, and then you're going to have the winter meetings in early December.
Right.
And then it basically, after the winter meetings, like a week or so after, it goes dark.
Everyone goes away for Christmas.
And
Hanukkah.
Yes, and the New Year.
Yeah.
So basically until after January, it's going to go dead.
Right, and I think
So-
fans, like, because the last couple of years, a lot of players have signed right around winter meetings. So fans, kind of the recent memory
Yeah.
bias is like, oh, well, everyone signs here.
Only this past year, and then if you think of only this
That's true.
last year, then the years before you had, I mean, there was all this uproar about it's so slow. You think about the year just before Cole and Strasburg signing at winter meetings, you had Machado sign once
In
spring training started, and Harper even later into spring training.
Yeah.
So you actually were not like one of the later ones.
Right.
But everyone, so it goes dark. But up until that point, you're having conversations with teams, but again, it's like you're dating them. You're getting to know them. We had to do everything via Zoom, but no one's necessarily throwing around any sort of numbers or monetary figures. It's more of, this is what's important to you. It's the team trying to say, these are all the things we have to offer, and, yada, yada, yada.
So I had a couple calls kind of in December, that like kind of late December time, just with some people from the team. So you guys were obviously on calls with a bunch of people.
We have the initial calls, and then in your case, and this doesn't always happen, but we wanted, because you're a very, I think, intriguing person, and teams usually want to get to talk to you and really see what you're all about, because there are a lot of there's so much to what you're looking for, and more than just on the mound.
It's different.
So we set up some calls, and you talked with teams as well, and some of like the pitching staffs and whatnot. But then then it goes silent. So everyone's saying, just hurry up and make a decision. And everyone in the media thinks that you're trying to, I think a lot of people thought you were purposely just dragging it out for attention or something.
It really flipped like early January. People kind of like, because I was trying to engage the fans and like put out some information and tease some shit, just
but we
interact
also
with them.
we couldn't, as much as we said, like, we're going to try to be transparent, and we can't divulge everything.
Right.
And so while we said we're going to put out accurate information, we did. We never put out anything, there was nothing that like came out of my account that was not accurate.
Right.
However, we can't share everything because we have a negotiation to do.
Right. It would have been really terrible for the negotiation to come out in early January and say, guys, relax. We don't have any offers yet. I can't sign. Like that.
Right.
That completely changes how things go.
But that's not to say that, again, you don't have offers.
Right.
Teams are just, especially in this off season, because we didn't even know spring training was going to start in time, and that was a real reality. While Manfred might have put reports out that the teams and the agents knew that we might not. So there was no sense of urgency to even make offers. So teams just weren't really in a rush to make any offers. Now, that's not to say that they would, throw around hypothetical or theoretical possible contract structures, but there were never any hard offers. There was never a sense of urgency until a lot later on in the process. So I think that's kind of.
So then mid-January you have arbitration, right? How much does the arbitration and like the exchange deadline affect the free agency side of things?
So usually, like, they'll spend that week leading up to it. Teams are focused on arbitration.
And
so
that's the second week of January.
Yeah,
right?
so they're going to be less focused on free agency.
Right.
And then you kind of have, I guess you had more signings. But look, this season specifically, I mean, players free spring training starting this next week, and there's still handful of players that.
The number's probably updated now. I looked about 5 or 6 days ago, and there's still about 150 players unsigned,
which is crazy. This is
way more than normal.
So that's
some of that has to do with COVID and teams shrinking budgets, but also some of it has to do with the uncertainty around when spring training may have started, when not. And also the CBA coming up next year. That's another obstacle, because teams aren't looking to make large commitments right before the CBA is negotiated.
Because it'll change things. But so I think,
And CBA, for everyone who's listening, is collective bargaining agreement between the union and MLB.
So I think one of the other things that made yours, maybe it took a little longer than it normally would have, because of the fact that we were going in and asking them to basically buy into this completely foreign structure for a player of your caliber. And that was one of the most difficult parts, because if you look at the market, you have no comps. We had no comps to compare you to, because if you even look at, let's say, we're going to take the top starting pitchers, and those AAVs of Cole and Strasburg at 30, Cole's at 36, and you have Strasburg's AAVs at like 32 with his deferrals. They have so many years on it. And so if you're asking for if you want opt-outs, let's say after every year, and this flexibility, well, for teams to really, it was really difficult for teams to totally wrap their heads around, and first like buy into and believe like this is really what he wants.
Yeah,
and then,
I think this is a really interesting one, and I'm actually really interested to hear what you say, because when I was thinking about this for the past 5 or 6 years or however long it's been, in my head I was like, well, what team wouldn't want a high caliber player for just a year or two, because there's no back end risk. This is something that I understood in my head. I was like, well, every team would just want to sign a player for 1 year.
You told us this, and you were like, this is ideal. Every team would love this. And first of all, it was foreign, so teams were definitely not super, they didn't jump all over it. They like very carefully, like tiptoed into that whole thing.
How much do you think that the media reports early on that I was actually looking for 6 or 7 years or whatever kind of swayed their opinion, or do you think it would have been that way even without?
No, I think it would have. I think the teams. That's one thing like kind of learn in this process, is that the teams and the agents like don't actually usually listen to the media that often, because
because they're talking to each other, so they know.
Yeah, like the teams knew what we wanted. They don't need a gossiper to say something.
Yeah,
like
gossip blogger.
Yeah. So anyways,
what's the process like to
so the
get
way
the team to understand?
So the way we first had to do it, it started before even talking to teams. We have to figure out what is your true 1 year, like what is a 1 year value for you. And that's really difficult, because it's not just in a vacuum going into your age 30 season, coming off of a Cy Young win, coming off or looking at what you're projected to do next year, and then
that's a key point.
Yeah, but what is your 1 year value? So you have to, not only do we have to figure that out, but then we have to factor in that, okay, well, there's this opportunity cost that if teams don't have to pay you for those back end years, if they do have to pay you for those back end years, not only do they have to pay you, but they also can't pay other players because of that. So they're saving money.
Or play other players, because if they're paying you a bunch of money, you have to play.
So there's so many things that go into that value that you now gain by saying, I don't want those. Like, you can keep those. And so what is your value? And so, we could go in and just throw out a number because you had literally no comps, or for a deal like that.
Right.
And that would be a risky thing, because if we just throw out any sort of number, then we just look silly if we have no foot to stand on.
If they ask, how'd you get that?
Where do you get that number? So we initially started with we had our analysts develop an algorithm that factored in so many things, and we had to do so many iterations of it and tweak so many different things to figure out, okay, what would your 1 year, and I'm not going to go into the details of how, what we had to do and all of that, but then we had an idea of, okay, this is what his value is. But then you have to consider the fact that a team, if they're going to put a team on the field behind you, they have to be able to pay that too. And so 1 year, that's difficult if your value is really high, to put a team behind you as well. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of factored into this 1 year, dealing with that. So we conceptually came up with what your value is in a vacuum, and then we have to, spend a lot of time with the teams, getting them to really understand that we're not just comparing you to the top of the market pitchers and with these AAVs of, at the high end 36. That 36 number with Cole was over 9 years. Right. So if we're asking, if you're going to cut back years, the AAV has to go up.
Yeah.
And so, getting them to, I think, really to feel comfortable with it. That probably factored into it taking a little longer than normal.
Well, one of the things that we didn't touch on in that is that just the overall dollars. Like, if you're going to sign Garrett Cole to 9 years, $36 million, that's $324 million that you're committing, right? It's a guaranteed contract. Whereas, like, I signed to around 100, so it's $224 million that the team isn't having to pay, but with that comes a certain benefit back to the player. And that's one thing that I think was interesting about this whole thing too, is like, hey, we're going to save you total dollars, but in exchange, again, there's another reason the AAV kind of has to go up and the flexibility and stuff like that.
Yeah, no doubt. So that part was, I think that was the most unique part of your...
What were some of those conversations like the first time you had it, where like, did people just... Did they not get it, or did they say, "Oh, I can kind of see that. We haven't thought about that. Let's think about it"?
No, it was just they just compared you to what they saw. They saw Cole and Strasburg on the market at 30. So if they didn't, however they wanted to compare you to those guys, okay, at the top end, and we had to keep explaining. Well, okay, sure, on a 6, 7, 8, 9 year deal. And then once we got them to understand, okay, but what if he wants a shorter, like what if he wants the flexibility every year? Well, okay, then you have to cut back years. And then, okay, but the value, it was just this, we had to kind of walk backwards because again, I mean, I think you've helped future players now because you have, this is a brand new type of contract. This is a high-end contract. I mean, you're the first player to ever get $40 million in a year plus. And now players are going to be able to have different options. They can go for the length and security, or they can go for shorter term deals. I think we keep hearing this all the time. I know I have at least that agents, other agents will say this, or writers have told me this, like, well, you never know what he could have gotten with, or how many more years he could have gotten with another agency. And if maybe they could have gotten him more years. And I just keep coming back to this, like, I'm like, first of all, then you clearly don't know Trevor. If you think that you were going to talk him out of, this is exactly what you wanted. Actually, you wanted like a 1 year deal. We said, how about we give you like 3 1-year deals for that security?
It took a lot of convincing.
And that took a lot. You were so hesitant about that. Months of even just getting you to buy into, okay, we'll give you 3 1-year deals so you have some security there. But even like no one was ever going to talk you out of this type of deal. No. And so it was like nobody would have gotten you longer because if they did, it would have been not as good of a deal for you
me.
Because if you opt out,
it's less of what I wanted.
Well, and if you're getting, let's say you're getting 8 years, let's say you get 8 years for $32 million and you have an opt out after every year. My guess is you're going to opt out you might opt out after the second or third year, and then all of that money on the back end is a waste. And you only got 32, 33 the first couple years. We ended up getting it up to 40 and like 45 essentially.
Right. Because
we know like you're going to stay on, like, we know those years you're going to like be there.
Yeah.
So no need to waste the back end.
Right. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to switch teams necessarily or whatever.
You can re-sign every year with with the Dodgers.
Of course,
you might re-sign for the rest of your career there.
Right. But that's the value that I get out of it, is I can choose every year, like, okay, am I happy here? Is it a good partnership? Do we have a chance to win? Right. Do I want to be here? What's important to me at this point? Did my life change? Did my priorities change?
Right.
But I have that flexibility, which I think is super important. And for me, it was like the biggest thing. So,
but I think that, like, in the partnership, I think this segues nicely into kind of the last part of it, which was at the end, I mean, to get a team that could pay this kind of money for you, it required you being willing to be creative and flexible, and you being open to having this partnership, because you're not trying to put them in a situation where they can't even put a team behind you. Now the Dodgers, like, they have like the highest payroll I think now in baseball
by far.
we were still willing to work with them and create a creative way to structure the deal so you're guaranteed in the first 2 years, you're guaranteed $85 million. However, the way we structured it, it allowed us, because of very complex and like just ridiculous rules with structuring for your luxury tax and all of that.
Without going into specifics on exactly like how the whole thing is structured, what are some of the things that the teams kind of have to worry about? You have the luxury tax, and there's different tiers of the luxury tax, right? And then there's some convoluted rule with the Players Association and MLB about the year over year, like...
Right, well, in how they factor in the amount for the luxury tax is based on AAV. So
so the luxury tax is based on the annual average value of the contract, not the actual pay that year.
Correct.
Okay.
It's based on the AAV. When we talk about whether they're going to hit the luxury tax and have to pay. So they're basing it off of the AAV. But then you also can't structure a deal where there's like an 80% rule, because there would be people would try to skirt around, the AAV rule by adding kind of bullshit years on the back end.
Right.
There's all sorts of things.
Like 1 year for 40 with the second year at 500,000.
Well, no, or 4 years with 500,000.
Right.
Or at the minimum.
So
you can't, so there's all sorts of things. So we had to get really creative with how we structured it. But at the end of the day, we were able to do it where we still guaranteed you $85 million in 2 years.
So there's some things that are... There's the CBA, obviously, like we touched on. There's the
CBA encompasses
the 80% and the 75% rule, and like
the CBA covers all the rules when we negotiate.
Then there's some other things too, like deferring money, right, or like signing bonuses. So I mean, the point of all that is just like there's so many different things that are up in the air. They're like, okay, well, what if we did this? Okay, well, we might want this, and like, what if we did? And so it took a long time to figure out kind of
taxes, because California is like super high in taxes and all sorts of things. So it was a very
very complex. I mean, at the end, when you actually look at the reasons for all the different stuff, it's a super complex deal.
Yeah.
I don't even understand it. I know numbers pretty well.
Yeah, it was definitely difficult, especially the last few days of it, trying to hammer out everything and get the language right, and you got to go back and forth with the union, and they go back and forth with the commissioner's office and make sure it's approved and all sorts of stuff. So
that's where it helps having you be a lawyer.
It does help to be a lawyer there, but.
All right, I think that's pretty much pretty much all we wanted to run down from start to finish.
Yeah, that's it was. Maybe one day we'll actually get to show you guys everything that kind of happened the last. I don't think you could.
You literally cannot imagine how ridiculous the last. Week was. So
we show them footage because I vlogged it, but we can't release it not right now. I showed Taiki and some of the Momentum guys some of the stuff, and they were just like, this is there's no way this is real. Like, you didn't plan this, and it's absurd. You
get anxiety just watching it, not being involved in it. It's pretty. Was the last week was just absolutely nuts. We got some great behind the scenes footage that hopefully at some point in the future may be able to come out. But obviously, with respect to the teams and all that stuff, we can't put it out right now. But that's pretty much the rundown. That's a lot of behind the scenes information, a lot of really technical information. So if there's anything that you guys didn't understand, or you want us to touch on more or explain a little bit more, please leave that in the comments. Let us know what you think about the whole process, and if you want to know anything more. But that's probably it for this video. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, you cheated. You weren't supposed to watch this video, but I'll give you a second chance. You can do that right now.
Or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's not nearly as cool, but
yeah, you can go to Luba Sports. You'll have a lot more content coming out, actually, now that your off season's kind of approaching. So
we're getting there.
Yeah. So I'll put a link in the description to Rachel's channel. And with that being said, I'll see y'all in the next one.